Hey everyone, welcome back to Equestrian Mama. I am so excited for today's guest on a topic that everyone has questions about, everyone wants to talk about, which is riding while pregnant. And today we're going to talk to Dr. Kathleen Bertuna about all things riding while pregnant and hear from an actual expert in the field. So without further ado, I'll start chatting with Dr. Bertuna. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we're so excited. Can you start with a little background on yourself and your riding and your experience as an OBGYN?
Sure. So grew up horse crazy and finally talked the parents into lessons. Started at a saddle seat, saddlebred barn growing up, and then switched to eventing in college. Sold the horse to go to medical school, and then tabled all my dreams because I was in saddle seat. I got excused from the ring a lot for going too fast. I just hadn't found my people.
Yep,
So with
that's what I
eventing, with eventing, I definitely was the place I needed to be. So put those dreams on hold, went to medical school, got married, residency, started a family, and did horses in and out through all the things whenever you could catch ride or steal a ride or whatever. And then finally, when my kids weaned from nursing, got back full time kind of into horses and haven't looked back. So
Amazing.
That was kind of my journey from being a horse crazy kid and up to now.
That is so awesome. I love it. And your practice now, you see women from all sports, all walks of life, right? Not just equestrians. Would you say do you have any equestrian women at the moment?
I do. Well, and so there's a couple different aspects of it. So I'm a OBGYN. I do full scope of practice. My specialty is urogynecology. I love to take care of women between the ages of 50 and 90, but I still take care of my teenagers, basically 12 and older. Still take care of pregnant women, through the ages. But really kind of focus on the urogynecology is the really fun part of my practice. And then another aspect is I'm in a group of women who are all equestrians, all physicians, all different types of physicians. And so that's a really fun group to be a part of and kind of cheering each other on.
Yeah, that's amazing. That sounds super empowering. A bunch of equestrian doctors. That would be very, very powerful women in that group.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. So when you started your family and you were doing horses and medical, you were finished with medical school at that point, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
What was your approach to horses and being pregnant and starting your family? Did you pause everything? Did you do a little bit of anything while you were pregnant?
Yeah, so I kind of had two different experiences. With my first pregnancy was my daughter. I was still a resident, so I didn't have a horse, and I was just kind of catch riding or seeing what I had. And so I more so went out to the barn for just a mental break from the rigors of residency and to groom a horse, pet a horse, graze it. I mean, just when you're a horse crazy kid, you just have to have that in your life.
Sure.
And then 3 years later, I was an attending, and I had gotten my daughter a little pony, and she would, I could lead her all over the farm on this little mini off my dad's horse, actually. And so then I was pregnant with my son. And so that experience, I was definitely doing a lot more riding because she was riding, but she wasn't independent because she was like 2.
Sure.
And so a lot of leading her around the farm, but I definitely ponied her off my dad's horse, who was just a saint of a Irish sport horse, been there, done that, those kind of things. So definitely rode a lot more with my second pregnancy.
That's very cool. That's so awesome. I love hearing everybody's unique stories.
Yeah.
So we, a little background on this project too. We kind of were starting this as a resource for equestrian moms in all stages. I personally am pregnant with my second baby at the moment, and am a professional trainer. So when I first got pregnant, I really struggled to find any resource, any help, or just people to talk to about what you do, how you do it, what you don't do, what you can do, but people don't like you to do, etc. So having you here is so exciting because I think so many women have these questions. And
Mhm.
I'm just going to go through a bunch of them that I know are kind of the most common that I've heard or that I've had, and get your opinion on
Sure.
specifically riding while pregnant, but definitely all things related to women's health
Mhm.
during, before, and after pregnancy.
Yeah.
So I would like to start with the most obvious and the most exciting to people, which is riding while pregnant. Um, kind of your general view at first of what you should or shouldn't do, but really a broad considerations is kind of what we're looking for and what's most interesting to most people, because we all know and understand that everybody is unique and every pregnancy is unique, every situation is unique. But are there certain considerations that could be broadly talked about?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think I'm in a unique place. I practice in Southeast Ohio, and there's a big trade school here that does a lot of outdoor activities with tree trimming and working with chainsaws and those kind of things. And I'm taking care of a lot of those women while they've been pregnant.
Oh, wow.
And so these generalizations kind of go to like the high risk sports or the adventure line or the bikers, the horseback riders, things that are inherently have a higher risk factor in pregnancy. And what I would say is, pregnancy is physiologic. Like it is nature, right? Like it is physiologic. That being said, there are definitely things that can make a pregnancy more high risk. And so I think knowing where you are in your pregnancy and your doctor can certainly help you stratify that. But in a typical straightforward pregnancy, the first 12 weeks or so, that pregnancy is very protected in the pelvis. And so, that's a very, the pelvis, it's surrounded by your three bones that make up your pelvis, your sacrum and your two ischiums, and your uterus is really protected. And so that pregnancy is really protected. Once you get really past 14 weeks and you start coming above the pubic brim, that's when trauma to your abdomen is going to be more significant of a risk to the pregnancy, whether that be in a car, whether that be on a horse, whether that be on a bike, whether it be in a tree, chainsawing.
Sure, right. Many versions of risk.
Yeah. And then as you get past 20 weeks, your point of gravity starts to shift and you get pulled forward. And so balance starts to become something to, a consideration. And I definitely say every pregnancy is a little bit different in how you carry it. Usually your pelvic floor is a little stronger with the first pregnancy. It gets a little weaker as time goes on.
I feel that.
And so anything that could be traumatic to the abdomen, after, 14 weeks, but really once you get to 20 weeks, that's when the kind of baby bump is really sitting out there and your center of gravity has changed and there can be more trauma to the abdomen. And the baby is really protected from a direct impact as far as the fluid around the baby, the muscle of the uterus, your abdomen. What's more concerning is like an acceleration, deceleration injury where the placenta that is not elastic can kind of shear on the uterus. And that's what we worry about a lot in car accidents. But that could definitely happen in a traumatic fall where you're going very fast, then you're stopping very fast, gravity and ground being those two factors. But
Sure.
The baby itself is very, surrounded in fluid and muscle and, all the things, but the placenta isn't elastic. And so when you kind of have that acceleration, deceleration, that's where you get the kind of tearing or shearing of that. And it can create a situation where you get bleeding and, that can lead to something called an abruption. So those are all the kind of the things you think about as an OB-GYN when I'm counseling women about the risks of things.
Sure.
And I mean, it's risky just living, right? Like walking out your door, getting in a car is a risk factor. And so I think everybody has to decide what their kind of risks are. And is 9 months going to make or break you if you're riding or not?
Right.
It seems like a really long time when you're in it. Now that I have a 14-year-old and a 17-year-old. 9 months wasn't very long time.
It probably seems much shorter now. Yeah.
Much shorter.
I totally understand that.
Yeah, it seems really short, but when you're in it, it does seem like a really long time, and especially a passion that you have, whether you're a trainer, whether it's for your enjoyment, whether you're a competitor. It's sometimes hard to, kind of reroute. And like one of the things that we do in eventing is we reroute all the time. I mean, that's just kind of our, that's our baseline, I think. And so rerouting can look so differently when to stay into horses. I feel like I'm really straying off this topic, but it's
good.
You can be involved in horses. Like with my first one, I didn't have a horse, but I had access to horses. So it was a lot of grooming and grazing and volunteering. And that's how I really stayed connected during that pregnancy. And then the second one, my daughter was riding and she loved her little mini horse. And so I was like, yeah, we're going to go hack around the farm. And we all know traumatic injuries can happen hacking your horse. You don't have to be jumping. You don't have to be galloping.
Standing next to them on the ground. Exactly.
Standing next to them on the ground can be dangerous. So, I think the horse I was dealing with was the most saintly creature, didn't have a spook, was sure-footed. And so I continued to ride up to 36 weeks. I don't recommend that for everybody.
Sure.
And I wasn't competing and I wasn't riding like any sort of, it was like hacking and, leading a pony around the field. But all that to say is it's going to look different for everybody that does it. And it certainly would depend on the pregnancy and how it's going and, your risk factors associated.
Exactly. That's great to hear, because that's sort of what talking with other moms come to the conclusion of. It's all individual and it's all the risk tolerance that you have, and also your body and your pregnancy and the stage that you're at. And then, your own personal pros and cons list, right? Like myself as a professional, it's difficult for me to step back if everything is going easily and well, because it's part of how I make my income, right? So having certain low risk pregnancy, high reward for continuing riding has pushed me in my direction and choices. But certainly, as you said, with everyone being unique, you can do so many versions of this, of being in the horse world. You don't have to ride while you're pregnant to get the full benefits of being around horses. And that's one thing I think we can all love about the industry, and brought us to horses and brought our love for horses, bringing everyone together in the first place, is that you can do so many versions of it and enjoy it and be successful. So I'm glad to hear you agree with that and think that in pregnancy it's the same.
Yeah. And I mean, it's fun to experience new things. I didn't grow up with like any sort of horsemanship training and whatnot. And going down those paths are really fun when you are kind of maybe forced to not ride, especially if you have a higher risk pregnancy, or, you have a multiple gestation pregnancy, or, you shouldn't be in an activity like that. I take care of a lot of patients that do CrossFit. And so they were doing CrossFit before they got pregnant. So I allow them to continue CrossFit while they're pregnant. And then just, I work with some of the coaches and we modify their activities so that nothing is going to land on the abdomen, none of the moves that they do, like, all right, show me what you're doing. I'm like, yeah, no, modify that.
Yeah, don't do that.
Barbell coming right up on your belly, not happening.
Sure.
Prolonged exercises on your back, not happening. And so, but, I've had women CrossFit, go to their workouts up until the day they deliver. So things can be modified and you can still get a lot of benefit out of the exercise or the activity, especially, whatever it may be. But with the horses, there's so many things you can do. You can do,
absolutely. Yeah. And I think making it the modifications at any level and any version of it are still super important to talk about, because that's something that I think when people say, oh, I rode when I was pregnant, it doesn't necessarily mean rode everybody, everything the same. I personally had just bought a young horse, a very young stallion, when I got pregnant with my first baby. And so right away, I knew I was not riding him anytime soon. And so that was something I changed immediately and tried to mediate risk throughout my pregnancy. I made a lot of choices that while I was riding safer schoolmasters, amateur horses, horses I knew very well. I chose not to take on any new clients during that time. I chose not to catch ride the problem horses or work on the difficult trailer loading horses and mediate the risk that way. And certainly, just as you were saying before, I talked with my OB about the risk that I had whittled it down to seemed similar to the risk of driving on the highway every day. So it was sort of my own version of paring down. But I think, like you said, it's just important to look at and talk to a doctor about what modifications you should make. You don't necessarily have to do a black and white stop, but you do need to look at what you're doing and maybe not do all of it the same way, certainly in any physical activity, right?
Exactly. And as the pregnancy continues, you check in with your OB if things change, if things, sometimes you go to your anatomy scan and they see the placenta's low and you have a previa. That would be like a hard stop for me. Like, no, let's not ride right now. Like,
sure. Yeah.
That moves. Like, let's make sure that that's not going to be a risk factor. You develop hypertension. Like, that might be we need to have a lot calmer gestation right now.
Yeah.
And so there's lots of things that could modify your activity level as you go along. And that's why it's so important to be with an OB-GYN that, listens and, has you have a good relationship with, because things will change as time goes on. So
I think that's so important and super true. I am doing things a little differently with my second pregnancy in that I'm using a midwife group that refers to an OB for the anatomy scan and certain testing, and but having a very thankfully a second low risk pregnancy that seems to be going the same direction as the first one, which allows me to be very physical still. I feel like the change I made was having a different line of communication. My first OB was very supportive, but not very interested. I think I could have told her I was base jumping and she would say, well, you look healthy and it's fine, just keep going. And so there's, I think, some level of you do have to believe that your OB trusts what you're doing and can support it fully and is not brushing you off or pushing you through the system, which unfortunately many women experience, especially in postpartum, I think, but even during. It's important to talk to your OB about what you're doing, not hide it, not dilute it, because that would be incredibly risky in this sport. But there are people like yourself that do support it and can advise very well and authoritatively and keep people doing what they need to do in both versions, but keeping the pregnancy healthy and keeping the woman healthy. I know for myself, which segues a little bit into my next question, my mental health was a huge question when I first got pregnant because I was not really prepared to stop riding and had been very nervous about that. And my first pregnancy was a surprise, a wanted surprise, but still a surprise nonetheless. And I was sort of thrown into that anxiety and fear of how am I going to possibly not ride and what am I going to do? And I'm a professional and blah, blah, blah. But riding for me did kind of help me transition from pregnancy to postpartum and to life, the entirety of life that is different after you've had your child. And managing my mental health in the beginning, riding, really being able to continue to ride really helped me through that. And so I would ask, are there benefits that you can see to riding, specifically with mental health, for your patients that might choose to do that, and certainly that their pregnancies support that? Because I think there may be some women out there who think if they sit around and not ride, even if it was possible for them and the risks were low, that could be more detrimental to continuing.
Yeah. I mean, I think, mental health in pregnancy is so complex because we know that uncontrolled anxiety, depression in pregnancy is actually really, really harmful to a pregnancy. It can lead to preterm labor, low birth rates or low birth weight, and those sorts of things. And so that's something that's very needs to be definitely addressed. I think what I see mostly in my women that want to continue to do an activity that maybe is a little higher risk in a higher risk category in pregnancy, that's really their outlet and that's what they use to help with their mental health and well-being, is when it comes in direct contrast to their partner or their family members not wanting them to do that activity.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that's where there's a lot of conflict that I see women go through when they're navigating kind of those choices. Absolutely. I think if it was just left to them and their doctor to have the conversation and look at the risks, and I believe in shared decision making. So we're going to talk about pros and cons and just what I talked about earlier in the podcast, where the uterus is at different stages and at what stage the risk kind of elevates. And, you know, my barrel racers, like that abdomen's going to be on the horn at about 24 weeks. So like, let's talk about
there are certain things you can't change.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. But at the end of the day, you know, I think navigating some of I've definitely had partners, parents of my patients come in and, you know, demand I tell her she can't do anything. And I'm like, well, let me give you my experience.
Wow. Yeah, exactly.
This is physiologic and these are, you know, whatnot. But I definitely encourage people. I think I do have some patients that come in and they stop everything. They stop whatever they were doing, you know, for the pregnancy. And I'm like, how are you feeling?
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
How's it going? And, you know, a lot of times we can navigate a way to continue to incorporate that activity. And it might look different. It might, be a different way to approach it. Because I think, you know, a lot of pregnancies, whether they're, you know, planned or a surprise or whatnot, just you get a lot of feedback from friends, family, whatnot, about what you should and should not be doing. And so it's sometimes hard to say, you know, well, this is really important for my emotional, my mental health to continue doing an aspect of this in a way that's, you know, like you said, not riding the stallion, not riding the problem horses, not, you know, being on things that are tried and true. And you can most part predict how they're going to respond to a situation.
Right.
Those kind of things.
You can make your risk as low as possible. I think
exactly. There's never a zero risk, but life isn't zero risk.
Right. So, exactly. Crossing the street, you can have something happen you didn't expect. So I think it's really important to reiterate, like you said, that a support system for what you're doing is key to the success of it. For me, it was super important for my mental health to continue riding, especially early on. But I was very fortunate to have a supportive husband and a family who, if they didn't like it, didn't say so or knew better, I guess. But, you know, we had discussed that early on, my husband and I, knowing that I was a professional, knowing that I was going down this route and that we did want to have children. And it doesn't come without people's opinions, people's feedback. Certainly myself being active on social media and sharing my story, I opened myself to a lot of feedback in all forms. And one thing I had to practice that I would say to anyone also choosing to navigate this riding while pregnant, even with the support of your OB, you have to be pretty strong in your feelings about what you're doing, because people will always tell you otherwise, and they can be a little bit cruel online. So I think having the support of your doctor is primary and key. Also having the support of your family and partner. But believing in yourself that that's what you want to do, and that's how because I think that's what creates the healthiest pregnancy that you could sustain, is knowing you have no doubts about what you're doing. And if you do have doubts about what you're doing, then change that or reconsider that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can always change your mind. I mean, I think that's one thing that's like, you know, as equestrians, we're like so good at pushing through discomfort and pain and, you know, heat and not feeling good and
it all the time.
Yeah. Like, I'm going to get this done. And I think in pregnancy, my biggest thing I talk to patients about is like, if you feel dizzy, lightheaded, if you're not feeling it, don't do it. This is not the time to be like, I'm going to sit this buck today. Yes, no, get off. Exactly. Lunge it, you know, let someone else get on it. It's not the time to push through that. And, you know, do listen I'm much more so in pregnancy. I want people to listen to their bodies, and if they're not feeling good, don't do it that day. Go give them carrots. You know, the horses don't care. Like they're happy
Exactly.
to, yeah, they're happy to get your carrots and go for a hand walk or whatever, you
It's
know,
so
but
true. That's so true. And that was something I learned through my first pregnancy that I'm now practicing much better in my second pregnancy from experience. My first pregnancy, I really thought I had to be a hero and keep going. And I didn't not listen to my body, because I think as riders, we are really extra tuned into our bodies, especially if you have been riding a long time and know that's such a huge piece of success in equestrian sport, is knowing when you're on and when you're not, and not trying to push through something. But during my first pregnancy, I really thought I couldn't show any weakness. I couldn't, back down from certain things. I made choices certainly that were obvious, like not riding the baby horses and the stallions. But even with the easy horses, there were days I thought, man, I feel crampy. I don't feel good. I can't sit the trot. I can only post the trot today. And nobody outside of my brain pressured me. It was all internal.
right.
But I learned then through the success of being forced to choose some days that I couldn't do full speed, that was fine. The horses were fine. Everybody lived. And that's what I tell my clients now, and new clients that maybe weren't with me through my first pregnancy, that are nervous about, what am I going to do? How am I going to ride? How am I going to train? I just keep telling people it all works out. It will be fine. Listen to your body, listen to being able to give yourself grace for when you can't do it. And when you're not up for it, it's perfectly fine. The horses are always there and always come back just fine, with even if a couple of weeks of tack walking never hurt anyone.
No, ever.
In fact, I think it's done a lot of them some good to have a back down of pressure as needed. And that goes for clients too. And certainly then for amateur riders or anyone doing it as a hobby, or doing it, even if you only go once a week and you think that day you can't ride, it is okay. It is totally okay. They will be there after, and they will be just as happy to see you. Like you said, give them a handful of carrots instead. It's perfectly fine.
It's totally fine. And the horses, they're not sitting there thinking like, I really wanted to go for my canter set today.
Exactly. They're keeping a little chart in their stall. They're like, today is supposed to be a gallop day. I don't know what she's doing. And now I'm really disappointed in her. So I think that.
Yeah, they're not planning. They're not plotting.
So no, they are not disappointed in us ever.
Yeah, not ever. And it's a fun journey to go through. I mean, the pregnancy is really, in the scheme of things, so short.
Yes.
It feels so long when you're in it. And I said, I've been there twice, and I've been there through thousands of other women's pregnancies at this stage in my career. And it really does seem at times to go on forever. And then I don't know if you experienced this with your first birth, but after the first birth, it was like, did that even happen? Like, where did that time go? It's
absolutely
over so quickly.
Even
and it's probably
the
all
second one, I think, is faster somehow. Yeah, exactly. It's something that you learn. I learned, at least, only through experience. Nobody could tell me. People told me. No. I heard it 100 times. It's the same with, like, before you're ever pregnant, people saying, enjoy this now, sleep now, you'll never do this again, these kind of warnings. But once you're through it and you are on the other side, you realize you can do a lot of things, and it's okay. A lot of things differently than what you were doing. For me, especially as a dressage trainer, change from my routine was very difficult. But then I learned that it's okay. The 20-meter circles are still there. It will still be something to work on after.
They'll be there for you.
Yes, exactly. And so I think that throughout your first pregnancy, or any pregnancy, or any version of it that you're doing, it's important to just be open to change, and giving yourself grace to get through it. That's really a key factor for me.
It's really important. It really is. At one point in my second pregnancy, I was out on my dad's horse and ponying my daughter, whatever. And my husband's like, oh, you're you're riding today? I was like, yeah, it was a beautiful day. And, I was due in the spring, and it was just one of those glorious spring days. And I was like, yeah, it's just called to me, and he's like, oh, okay. He's like, that's great.
There are days that
it, weeks,
yeah, exactly.
It's just one of those days.
There are days that pregnancy is so unique in so many ways to anything else that I've experienced in life, at least physically. And what's amazing to me is that there can be those days randomly you feel incredible, powerful, superwoman, able to do anything. And that's the day that you do what you want to do. If you have been and you feel up for it, and the risks are all mediated and everything is in place. But then you have to understand the other side of it, that if you don't feel good, then it's not the day to do it. And
you're crampy, you don't feel like it, it's not happening. Go give the carrots and
groom them, look at them, take a picture of them. It's all the same in many ways to the horse. And in the end, it's not enough time over time to risk something that would be so difficult to reverse.
Yeah, it could be catastrophic. And so, and those, and I think that's another conversation I had having with my patients with risk, what is your acceptable levels of risk? And because it's very different for everyone.
Absolutely.
If you want to mitigate all the risks, we can talk about that. If, where's your level, and how do you feel if there's something catastrophic that happens? It's different for everybody, and one size does not fit all.
Right. Absolutely. And I think there's no right answer, wrong answer there either, because it is so unique, and it just has to come down to the individual and their conversation with their doctor and their families, like we've said.
Yeah.
And I think, all of this is so helpful and so great just to hear, because I think for many women, it will be confirmation of what we think internally or we know as intelligent horsewomen, but helps to hear more people say it. So I'm really glad we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
I think then in regards to postpartum, if we can.
Yeah, let's talk about postpartum.
Transition a little bit. Certainly the two broad versions would be a vaginal birth versus a C-section birth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think everybody's main question as riders is, when can I ride again? And how will I know? And we're all told from our OB, well, there's a 6 weeks appointment, at least for the vaginal birth. Certainly C-section is different, but you can't do anything before then. And then after that, we'll see. Yeah. But I know there are nuances to everything. And so I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
Sure. So that's a great point. So there's the vaginal deliveries and C-section. So let's address the vaginal deliveries. So essentially after birth, depending on how your delivery went and the level of trauma to your perineum is. So you can have different degrees of lacerations. And so I would say, your first degree is going to be very kind of superficial. Second degree gets into some muscle. Third and fourth degree get into a real kind of pelvic support structure. And so based on the level of injury to the perineum, this all may be a little bit different. As far as the physiology of postpartum, that uterus is really starting to involute and shrink down after birth. So the fascinating thing about the uterus is that it doesn't really add a lot of cells for pregnancy. It stretches. It's amazing. It stretches to hold 1, 2, 3 babies, whatever. And then it shrinks back down to normal size. It's just a fascinating structure. And so that usually is really involuting well at the first 2 weeks. And the placenta, where it was attached to the uterus, a scab forms inside. And so that sloughs off somewhere between 10 and 14 days. That area, if it doesn't slough properly and the uterus contract properly, that's where you get a lot of bleeding issues. So the first 2 weeks, you really need to be taking care of yourself, getting the sleep when you can, figuring out how you're feeding the baby, however that looks to you, and focus on recovering from the delivery. As you get into the third and fourth week, the bleeding should really taper off. That uterus is almost back to below the pubic bone, shrinking down. And then by that 6 to 8 weeks is completely back to normal size, which again is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely. I think it's all a huge miracle in so many ways.
Crazy. Like the human body and the women are just, they're the most fascinating.
It's incredible and also
creatures.
inspiring. I'm like,
Yeah.
how are we all not going around wearing medals for this?
All the
is
time.
what our body does.
All the time. And it does it pretty much on its own.
On its own. Yeah. I never knew anything about what it did or how it did it. I certainly couldn't command it to do any of that if I wanted to.
No, right? So the first 2 weeks I feel like are pretty sacred time, like not only for you and the child, but just for your body to heal from all the physiologic changes it went through. Your hormones go through such a roller coaster that first 2 weeks. You're going to go from having the most estrogen, progesterone you've ever had in your life to nothing. And that is brutal those first 2 weeks.
So brutal.
So brutal.
I'm sure
you're
everyone
hot flashes
who
and
has
night
gone
sweats.
through it.
You're going to cry when the gas light comes on in the car. I mean, that's all very normal. It's horrible. But there's so much change going on. I think being able to go out and see your horse and give them carrots during that time is huge for your brain, especially, with or without a newborn. Really, you don't want the newborn out with the general public for a good 6 weeks. But all that to say, take care of your body for the first 2 weeks. After that, I mean, if you had relatively little trauma to your perineum, third and fourth week, I mean, you could flirt with getting back into some exercise, getting on some easy rides, those kind of things. When you look at the pelvic floor, I mean, there's the stretching that goes on through the birth canal. A relaxed muscle is going to stretch about, a third more, 33% more than like a tense, tight muscle. And so everyone's genetic material is going to be different. So some people are going to be stretchier, some people aren't. And so the rebound of the pelvic floor is going to take some time. And so I wouldn't do anything stressful the next 2 weeks. So the third and fourth week, you get up. If you want to go for a hack around or some light riding, I wouldn't really stress that pelvic floor because you're going to probably have some incontinence. It's not going to be comfortable. It's going to be, it's
a rough time.
It's a rough time. Yeah. By the fifth and sixth week, your body's kind of getting back into the swing of things. That's a great time to establish. I wish it was mandatory. Like I wish it was best practices for insurances to pay for pelvic floor physical therapy, PFPT after every delivery. I think it would save us so much cost and, morbidity in the end of, when we get into the fifth decade of life, as far as our pelvic floor goes, our bladder, function and those sorts of things. I think it's also fine that if you have a traumatic delivery with, some, more significant perineal laceration, take the time it takes to let the stitches heal. And that could be 3 months. Yeah. That could take 3 months for those perineal muscles to really heal and to go through pelvic floor physical therapy and make sure there's not nerve damage and make sure the muscles are working well and those kind of things. So those are just kind of some of the caveats to the kind of how I talk to my patients as far as progressing their activity level.
Yeah, I think it's really important for people to hear that it could vary so much. I think it's frustrating to see sometimes, at least in the equestrian news, or maybe it's just the circle that I follow, that you see these women riding at 2 weeks and bouncing back, which is a term that I hate, with seemingly such ease. And then anyone like myself who had third degree tearing with my first baby thought I was somehow failing because I was at 7 weeks not even ready to look at a saddle. And I wanted to ride desperately, but my body was not quite ready. And that is okay. It's also going to work out. I do ride professionally still now, right at the same level I did before. It just took a little bit longer to get back to it. And that can happen and it can vary hugely. And it's not fair to look at any one case and say, this is the standard. And that's why sometimes I think it's frustrating to hear some stories of OBs saying just 6 weeks. And if you've done the 6 weeks and now you're good to go, okay, the baby's healthy, you're healthy, go back to whatever you were doing. It might be that way. It might not be that way. And you have to, again, listen to your body, talk to your doctor, be vocal, have a support team that can discuss all your options, but know that it will still work out. Just might be a different timeline.
there is so much more that women have access to now than like even when I started practicing 20 years ago. You know, they
Sure.
have the pelvic floor physical therapy has come so far. There's so much more help for women with their pelvic floors, you know, to help them get back in the saddle comfortably and not, you know, have worries for incontinence or, you know, pain from the deliveries and those sorts of things. When we look at C-sections, there's a lot of healing that happens. The 2-week mark is where there's a ton of inflammatory changes that are healing the tissue. And it's really, really important to not disrupt that during that time frame. So like the first 4 weeks after a C-section are pretty much healing, recovering. Your body's spending a ton of energy to heal that tissue.
Sure.
And you don't want to disrupt that. You don't want hernias. You don't want complications during that time frame because it can be very disruptive to like a long-term healing process. And so for my C-sections, I'm pretty much a stickler for anything that's really going to incorporate the abdominal muscles. 6 weeks is kind of the earliest, you know, some 5 weeks, you know, everyone's a little different.
Sure.
But the first 4 weeks are a little bit sacred. I mean, I want you out moving, I want you walking, but you got to be careful about really stressing that incision and those stitches during that, you know, critical healing period.
Absolutely.
And then, you know, and some people will be ready to get on at 6 weeks. And again, sometimes depending on the type of C-section you have, depending on, you know, if there's any previous scar tissue, it might look like more than 3 months. You know, by 3 months, pretty much with any, you know, complication from a vaginal delivery or C-section, if you're still really struggling to get back into the activity that you were doing before, you know, not that at the level, but just like getting back into it,
starting,
like something needs addressed. You know, there is a problem with the healing process, with the, you know, if there's any nerve pain, if there's any, you know, damage to structures, need more help. I mean, like I said, the PFPT women that I've worked with that do the therapy, they are incredible and they can really, really help a lot of situations. And just like a slight sidebar of, you know, women, you know, can have a lot of trauma in their life from lots of previous experiences. Birthing can bring out a lot of trauma in your body. Like it's a very powerful thing to go through, whether it's a vaginal delivery or a C-section, and your body is going to respond to that stress. And that trauma may come out, and it might not be something that you thought about or dealt with, or, you know, for years and years and years and years, but your body remembers. And so it may come out in a way that you didn't expect. And that postpartum period might be a really critical time to address some of those issues that may have came up, you know, from that experience. And it could be a trauma that was like, you were a kid, you had a lot of surgeries, you were in and out of the hospital, and it just triggered a lot of those emotions. It could be something more, you know, serious, of a trauma that's more personal. And so it's just a very critical time where you have this little newborn life that like is requiring so much and needs so much, but you might also need a lot.
You have to look at yourself as well and take care of yourself, which I think is something that equestrians in particular are bad at.
So bad.
And so bad. And
bad.
Need this reminder constantly. And hopefully people can relate to this, I'm sure, if they went through it, but knowing that you cannot white knuckle this again. You cannot try to push through and ignore things physically with your health that we are all, as equestrians, pretty much programmed to do. It's always the horse first and the horse's needs first. And we're tough and we are strong and we are nothing limitless. Nothing will slow us down. But this is a time to slow down, especially postpartum. And I learned that the hard way also, dealing with then an incredibly long labor, bad tearing, postpartum depression. And I was forced to stop and take care of myself and try to learn how to take care of a newborn at the same time, which is, of course, extremely difficult. Again, women are superheroes. Men's bodies are incredible. But it's can't be said enough that you really need to focus on being quiet, being still, being tuned into your body, being restorative. And that's hard. That's hard for us. But when you take the time and focus on that, you avoid so many other issues that then require treatment or fixing later on in life. And if people think about that ahead of time, I think it might prevent some of the issues that we see.
Well, just to have that like a little awareness, because I think, like you said, we're terrible at like pushing through and being really gung ho. And with my first child, like breastfeeding just was not going well. Like she probably was like, now tongue tying is like more recognized, but back then
Yes.
it wasn't. And so she was a terrible nurse. She was terrible at it. And I was a first time mom, so I wasn't very good. I don't know what I was doing. And I'm an OB-GYN. Like I have all the resources. I have all the lactation specialists. I'm getting so much help and it's just not working. And, it was very upsetting and I had postpartum depression and it was just awful. And I was talking to my friend who's a pediatrician and she's like, Kathleen, she's like, if the baby gets 50% breast milk and 50% formula, like you get 90% of the benefits. For whatever reason, that statement like released so much guilt. And I was like, oh, let's just feed her.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. We could do a whole other segment on breastfeeding and support for women after.
And my OB-GYN at the time, she wasn't very, like, I was a very, like ambitious, goal-oriented, couldn't wait to get back to work because I was very good at that, not very good at the whole stay-at-home mom thing. And so she, I went in and I was like, I think I have postpartum depression. She's like, oh no, you just don't want to come back to work. I'm like, no, I don't want to come back to work.
Actually, I do want to work. That'd be a problem.
And so it was really hard because I asked for help and she just really kind of blew me off.
Yeah.
And so then it took a lot longer because postpartum depression, if you treat it early, it's really like 6 months treated, you're done, you're out of like, it's great. Yeah. And so for me, it was like, it went on and on and on and on and on. And finally, like at a year, it lifted and it was awful. But for my son, I'm like, I had my bottle of Zoloft. I'm like, I'm ready to go. I'm not messing around. And it didn't really develop, but I was like, I am not going to do that again. Exactly. And I'm in the profession.
Yes, that's great to hear too, because I was the same way with my second pregnancy. Basically, as soon as I found out I was pregnant, I was like, okay, let's have a plan. Let's get some drugs in order. We need to do this differently. I'm not doing that again. But that's, again, the experience you learn the first time, sadly, the hard way. But I think the more that we talk about this and talk about it broadly to our specific group, especially who are known for not taking care of themselves, it's not the time. It's not the time to be the equestrian hero who doesn't take a vitamin or anything. It's the time to really take extra care.
It really is.
I really, absolutely. I love that you spoke to the pelvic floor therapy because that is key. That was crucial for me, certainly with bad tearing, but I think, like you said, it's important to anyone. In regards to coming back into riding after, if everything is progressing and you have the okay with your doctor to continue riding, what exercises or things outside of horses do you think help, or do you think it's really kind of the pelvic floor is the key and getting back into it then slowly and carefully has an equal amount of success as if you were to try something new?
So I would say that, doing the exercises, the pelvic floor physical therapy exercises themselves are just a little bit more specific than just Kegel exercises. I've had a lot of success with women using devices like, it's at the tip of my brain. PeriFit, which is like an internal device that Bluetooths to your phone and you can do activities to squeeze the muscles.
Oh,
those
cool.
are, great.
Very cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Great activities to do to really, kind of work those pelvic floor muscles. I mean, equestrians are so lucky because typically our pelvic floors are a lot stronger because of how we use them and, for hours and hours in the saddle. And we're very fortunate that a lot of times we can isolate those a little bit easier than patients who have never sat in a saddle or, sat a canter or gallop or whatever, or very big sitting trot. So, but I think, getting back into the work, there's definitely exercises you can do at home. I mean, there's so many resources online and, for those kind of exercises, you can't really go wrong. Like I said, I'll give my plug to PeriFit. I think that it does a really nice job of targeting the muscles.
Yeah, that's great to know. That was another question I had, was what resources you might recommend. And that goes for postpartum recovery and riding while pregnant. I think a big goal of this podcast is to spread the word about information regarding these topics. And then people, of course, make their own choices unique to their situation. But sharing resources is always very welcome.
Yeah. I think so. That's a really good device to help with the pelvic floor. I think one thing to keep in mind that when you're pregnant, you have a lot of hormones, the progestin, the relaxin. There's a lot of hormones in your body that are going to relax your joints. And so your pelvis is going to change quite a bit during pregnancy. And if your sacrum gets stuck, so I'm an osteopath, I'm a DO. And so if your sacrum gets stuck in flexion or extension, it can cause a lot of back pain and sciatic pain. If that happens, find yourself a good osteopath that does manipulation. I prefer them over chiropractors just because I'm a DO, and I think using a doctor of osteopathy is going to be it has a little different philosophy.
That's so interesting. That's great to know.
Yeah, but they can do manipulation, and they can, a lot of it is soft tissue, working with your diaphragms, but can really help get things functional again. And so if that happens to you during pregnancy or postpartum, get with a good osteopath. Your doctor can refer you if they don't know. But you can also, look them up online. I'm really fortunate. I'm in, like I said, Southeast Ohio. There's an osteopathic school here, and we have a lot of osteopathic physicians that do manipulation. But it's a wonderful thing in pregnancy to relieve back pain and hip pain, and because your body's going to change a lot. I will warn every one of you that is your first pregnancy. When you get back in your saddle after you've had a baby, it's so different.
It's different. I had to sell mine. I had to sell my custom saddle that was made for my horse and myself because it was so wrong. I could not believe it. It was crazy. That was one of the unexpected things also in postpartum was, don't buy a very expensive saddle right before you get pregnant because it will be different.
Your hips are really going to change, and it feels good and comfortable. And I always laugh when I ride in my trainer's saddles that she's never been pregnant, and I'm like, oh, these twists are too narrow.
These twists are bad. Yeah,
bad twist for my birth and hips.
Absolutely have a newfound appreciation for that. And even in my second pregnancy, I think the relaxin is pumping a lot faster, a lot sooner. And I am just in a new place of like every other day. I'm like, I think my stirrups are wrong. I think I don't like this length anymore. These boots don't fit me today. I don't understand why. I hate the saddle today. I'm just going to like to ride bareback, I think, forever now. But there's so many changes, so many wild things that happen.
It is. And I was really unprepared as an OB, like counseling women and taking them through pregnancies and then going through it myself. I was like, wow, there is so much people do not talk about or tell. And now it's, that was 17 years ago. Now, there's more information, but it's how do you weed through that information, and what's good information and what is not good or, solid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Information. So this is a great platform to help people realize that, ask questions. If you're not getting the answers you want, it's okay to ask for second opinions, but definitely, it's okay to ask for what you want and to have a conversation regarding those issues that are really important to you.
That is such great advice. That's a very good note, I think, to wrap up our conversation on everything. And this has been an absolute privilege, honor, pleasure speaking with you about this topic. And thank you so much for your professional advice and guidance and conversation. It's really been a fantastic time.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed trying to share information with women that have, are just horse crazy, and you go through these stages. It's just overwhelming. So thanks for having me.
Of course. It's been such a pleasure. And we're hoping to open communication channel through this podcast also, and people can feel free to reach out to me through DMs, and hopefully you and I will stay in touch. And if we have further questions or things we haven't covered here, we'll try to get to it another time. But thank you so much, Kathleen. It's been such
good luck with your pregnancy.
Thank you.